So now this is a piece from 2001. Tell us what you're thinking about here.
Well, it's kind of twofold, and a lot of the pieces that I work, kind of have dual things going on. And so part of this was in response to how, we had separate leagues up until, of course, Jackie Robinson. There was the African American League, or the Black Negro Leagues, and then the White Leagues. And so it kind of talks on one hand kind of these sort of separate leagues and how they were actually never allowed to sort of compete with each other. But it also talks a little bit about how and I noticed it growing up with my son growing up and taking him to Little League and stuff like that, how there's this segregation within Little League. And then I was also talking to someone who was saying that in a lot of the poorer communities, there's no Little League whatsoever. And so kind of, again, this sort of thing, is this sort of inaccessible sport in a weird sort of way. And so these are all found baseball bats, and then I carved them.
Now, where did you find them?
Flea markets, estate sales.
Those are places that you might go to find materials.
Those are places I go to a lot. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm a bit of a junk sale junkie. And so I like that, and you can see how some of them have the tape on them. And so they all have, some sort of wear and tear. The best ones would be like Louisville Sluggers because they were like big and fat and had a little bit more material to work with. But then I covered them with more pitch, and so that this sort of tone comes out of the pitch. And it starts to look like libations or like palm oil, which are often used to kind of make that really beautiful patina on African works of art. And so it kind of has that sort of feel.
Oh, it certainly does, yeah. And so then you've just carved the tops of the heads
together?
I just
carved the, and each one's different. Each one has their own sort of little personality. And of course, I was working within, however many inches of wood I had to work with.
Right.
And so they all have their own little characters.
Well, in one interview, you mentioned also you referenced gang violence too as
that as well, and that kind of exactly that in whose hands are these allowed to become whether these it's kind of like, do you have the option of giving these baseballs to kids and giving the money to get these baseballs to kids so they can actually play a sport with it, or do you kind of like let them flounder after school or whatnot, and then they get into some other sort of mischief with baseball bats? And so what's our responsibility, social responsibility, to kind of bringing things to the community and providing them with alternatives.
Okay. What would you like to take a look at next?
So going from this piece, which is also fairly old, the Bat Boys, actually the more recent piece, which was made for the show specifically, is this piece Anthropos. And Dane had come to my studio when we were talking about this exhibit about a year and a half ago. And I'd been collecting these scissors for a year, 2 years, and they were just hanging up in the studio. And it's funny because sometimes the way I work is I'm just attracted to something and I'll just start buying them and have no idea kind of what these things mean to me. I mean, obviously it's about cutting and the sort of severing of ties. And interestingly enough, when we got the show installed, it almost became a recurring theme about ties that have bound us and trying to cut loose from these ties. And so I felt that this is kind of a nice way to go to sort of start resolving this piece and thinking about what it's going to become. So
now, what is Atropos first? Tell us the title.
She's one of the three goddesses. I'm trying to remember what the whole grouping of them, but they're three muses, and one would be the beginning of life and the string of life, and one's the middle of life, and Anthropos is the one that cuts the string of life or cuts the thread of life. Okay. And so she kind of has this umbilical cord type thing that's come and bound all of these shears together and scissors together. And so I guess she's kind of, symbolizing death, but also really kind of like the cutting of one aspect. It's not necessarily a mortality thing, but the sort of cutting and changing around.
So a generation or renewal almost even.
Yeah.
Or is that too optimistic a way of phrasing it?
No, that's good. Yeah. And I think for myself, it's, I'm coming at a point where the work is starting to shift a little bit, and so I kind of see that as kind of cutting away and cutting loose, these other things. Yeah. And so she's still, I guess it's still kind of sort of shadowy, vague. It hasn't been totally resolved yet in my mind, so she kind of becomes a sort of shadowy, vague thing on the wall. And so this is just an insight drawing that we did on the wall, and then have all this
stuff. And it's interesting to see it against Cakewalk, where we think of the violence. And when I looked over here, I saw blood. I saw these scissors as sort of knives.
As stabbing,
as
right,
stabbing,
right.
yeah, and coming from her belly, from her womb on down to the floor.
And spilling out. Yeah,
yeah.
But it's funny because, and I guess because there's a struggle, because, at one point, it's a questionable whether they're cutting or if they're being bound by it. And so there's this sort of fight between, there's a resistance there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
The scissors are being, it's like rock, paper, scissors almost, where, the scissors are being contained.
They're being rocked.
Right, yeah. So there's some sort of give and take going on here as well. But I just love all these, like, immense shears. They're just beautiful
So
things.
this is the piece for the Atkinson Gallery.
Yeah, we did this for the show in particular.
We'll move away from it over towards this braid here.
Okay.
And tell us about that.
Well, this piece is called Proclamation, and it's kind of the aftermath of the next piece we'll look at. But I think it's about 15 feet worth of braid that I then had cast it in bronze. And I think, it's, as I mentioned with the Tropos piece, I'm kind of at a point in my career where I'm really eager to move on to new things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also at a point in my life where my son's in college. Mm-hmm. My daughter just turned 16 yesterday. Oh. And so I'm also kind of, getting over the nesting thing mm-hmm. and ready to move on in that aspect of my life as well. And so, this is kind of like this, and I guess in a way I'm referring to the indentured Chinese labor that was, mainly brought west to build the railroads, and how they would grow braid, and then when their servitude was up, they would cut their braid off, their queue off. And so this is kind of like taking a queue and nailing it up to the wall, and kind of the way you would nail a proclamation of independence, or nail up a notice that I'm done, I'm free.
So those of us who are parents know.
Right, you can just cut the hair off.
And it feels like bronze.
It's curious how this is. I didn't even think of it until just now. But every once in a while, I'll grow my hair for like a decade, and then I'll braid it and cut it off. And so I have actually a bunch of these little braids sitting in my drawer, and it's always kind of about this sort of regeneration and kind of cutting away old stuff. And kind of cutting yourself free of things. And so that's kind of what that is.
And it's a great accent, right, as we walk into the gallery. This is the first thing people see, yeah. Well, so you said this is kind of a postscript to what's really probably the main piece called Coup. And we have a drawing of it over there, so we'll let you walk us over and talk us through this pretty complicated piece.
And so again, we've got these killer pairs of shears here. And, again, I think, maybe because I don't feel like I'm really ready to cut those ties, but I'm definitely poised. So I'm, and I guess so this would be considered a self-portrait of some sort. When I do work that kind of refers to my personal life, they don't necessarily look like me, but they definitely, you could tell a lot about what's going on in my life by looking at them. And so this is this figure, and she's poised with these rather massive pair of shears, and I would say about 10 feet of braid that goes back to all this excess baggage.
A lot of luggage,
accumulated. What is it? I think it's a Fats Waller song that's talking about cutting loose his excess baggage, and just ready for a change. And so this could represent my children who I love, but would really love to see them kind of pack their own bags and move on to their own lives. It can represent sort of I think it also represents a lot of old ideas and kind of my past work and my sort of history of my work, and really ready to kind of move on to new ideas and new imagery. And so it's all bound up, it's ready to go. I'm also just really attracted to all these beautiful suitcases.
And the colors, to find the colors
stuff.
of these suitcases going together is amazing.
And some of them are really amazing because you open them up and they have, they're just like little hotels in and of themselves. They have compartments for stuff like that. So,
well, tell me about what this is made out of, because it looks to be made of a lot of separate small pieces.
Well, what it is to kind of talk about my technique in these works, they're solid wood underneath, and so I'll glue together. Usually, I go about it in a very backwards sort of way. I might glue together a block the size of a refrigerator of wood, and then start hewing away at it. I've since become a little bit more savvy in that I can piecemeal parts of it. And so then I use the chainsaw and I use a chisel and kind of for the features and the hands, and then I cover it with the ceiling tin, which comes out of living in New York for 15 years. That it was everywhere. Now on the West Coast, it's a hard thing to find, but it's just pressed ceiling tin. And what I like about it is, one, that it's physically a skin.
It's mountable, yeah.
Yeah, but that there's a figure underneath it, and then the skin kind of covers it. It also looks like this sort of armor, which also plays in a lot with my work in terms of we're always got these defenses up. But I also love that all this patterning can also look like scarification and this sort of identity through sort of patterning or tattooing or kind of creating these patterns on your body to kind of either record who you are or to sort of dispel bad spirits.
Okay. But we walk in and we see a drawing of this on the wall. Why is that important?
Again, I think we wanted to talk about, how it talks a little bit about the process, whereas most artists do the drawings first and then, do the sculpture after. While looking at the drawing, I kind of do a flip of that. And so that's really what that is. And then it's also about all these, I've piecemealed all these different kind of pieces of paper when I talk about I don't like working flat. That these are, all these wonderful pieces of paper from Nepal and all over the world that are glued together to kind of create these drawings. So.
Well, it's a great exhibit. The people who are watching the creative community on television right now, unfortunately, have already missed this show.
Oh, well.
This is their memorial, the time to go through it and actually have seen it with the artist herself. As I thank you and say goodbye, what have you got? I mean, you're talking so much about things on the horizon. What are you working on right now?
What am I working on now? Well, I just finished doing a large piece in New York City of Harriet Tubman, a memorial for Harriet Tubman in Harlem, and preparing to do a memorial for York, who was the slave in the Lewis and Clark expedition. And that's going to be up in Portland. So those are the two things that are most
two big projects.
On the horizons. Yeah.
Well, Alison Saar, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Creative Community is produced by Santa Barbara City College in association with the Santa Barbara Channels, with the help from generous grants from the Diana and Simon Robb Foundation and the Santa Barbara County Arts Commission. I'm David Starkey, and we'll see you next time.
The Creative Community is funded in part by the Organizational Development Grant Program using funds provided by the City of Santa Barbara in partnership with the Santa Barbara County Arts Commission and with a generous donation from the Diana and Simon Rabb Foundation.